Good morning once more, everyone. My name is Dr. Ifeoma Nevobasi. I'm a consultant radiologist at the University of Nigeria Teaching Hospital in Enugu. And today I'll be discussing introducing MRI physics. And here are my outline. So we'll be talking about the history and the evolution of MRI, the different types of MRI scanners in terms of designs and configuration, the components and the functions of the different components, contributions of key figures in the development of MRI technology, and some of the guys who had Nobel Prizes. And then we'll discuss the various applications of MRI, including disease diagnosis and medical research. Also, the social and economic factors that influence the development and dissemination of MRI technology. Afterwards, there will be a short video that simplifies MRI physics, protons, magnets, radio frequency wave, and how the spin echo sequence comes about. So MRI is a medical imaging technique used in radiology to form pictures of the anatomy and the physiological processes in the body. These scanners use very powerful magnetic field, magnetic gradients, and radio frequency waves to generate images of the organs or tissues in the body. It is an incredibly useful imaging technique and can image every part of the body. It has a very beautiful soft tissue delineation, and it's usually used or excellent for brain and spinal cord, as well as muscles, ligaments, and tendons. Dr. Raymond Demedian is called the father of MRI, and he built the first magnetic resonance imaging machine. He performed the full body scan in 1977. However, there are some controversies about him that made him not to win the Nobel Prize in 2003. And he wasn't silent about this. He actually voiced that without him, MRI could not have, been found. Two other scientists won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2003. And they were jointly awarded these prizes. Their names are Paul Lutterball and Sir Peter Mansfield. Paul Lutterball was born in 1929, 6th of May, 1929 in Ohio, USA, and he died in March 27, 2007. While Sir Peter Mansfield was born in October 9, 1933 in London and died in February 2017. Paul Lutterball discovered the introduction of gradients in the magnetic field, which made it possible to create two-dimensional images. So with the gradients, he was able to visualize a cross-sectional image of ordinary water surrounded by heavy water. So in essence, he was able to distinguish between heavy water and ordinary water. While Peter Mansfield was more practical in his approach. So he actually discovered how to use gradients and radio frequency for pulse to produce images, okay? So he showed how the detected signals were rapidly and effectively analyzed and transformed into images. And his discovery later gave birth to what we call the echoplanar scanning. Some other guys from Switzerland, whose names were Richard Ernst and Kurt Wuttig, won the Nobel Prizes in chemistry for nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy and three-dimensional structure of biological macromolecule in spectroscopy. And these are the great guys, Dr. Raymond Demedian, and the very first MRI scanner that he Butte, and Dr. Littlebell and Mansfield. And the components of MRI scanner. There are 4 major components of an MRI machine, and these include the magnet, usually formed by superconducting coils, gradient coils, the radio frequency coils, and the MR coils. But of course, there are so many other components, which include the computer system, the cryogenic cooling system, the table, the patient table, the operator console, the power distributing unit, gradient amplifiers, radio frequency amplifiers, radio frequency receiver assembly, image construction computer, and other peripheral devices and safety systems. Now, there are different types of designs of MRI machine. You have the closed MRI machine, the open MRI machine. And I have pictures here to show the closed one and the open one, and then a more advanced form of the open MR machine. And these designs come with different, advantages and disadvantages. So the closed type is this one that has a bore, okay? And some of the advantages of the closed MRI is that it's widely available. That's what you see commonly. And it has this versatility in terms of diagnosis. It's also quicker compared to the open one. However, it has some disadvantages for people who are have big body sizes or overweight people. They tend to find it difficult to fit into this machine. And also people who are claustrophobic find it very, scary to go into this machine. But the open type is more acceptable in terms of people who are claustrophobic, and is also more child-friendly. And for people who have large body size, is better. It has also fewer image artifacts. Okay, so these are some of the advantages of the open type. And then you have different field strengths of MRI. Initially, we were using a 0.35 Tesla. Now we have 1.5 Tesla virtually in most centers. And then you have the 3 Tesla MRI. Presently, 7 Tesla MRI, the high field 7 Tesla MRI has been, approved for human clinical imaging. Okay, and then you have some other higher frequencies, usually for research, 11 Tesla, 13 Tesla, and all of that. So there are also advantages and disadvantages of these high magnetic field Tesla imaging. The higher the magnetic field, the better the signal, spatial resolution, temporal resolution is better. However, there are disadvantages of going higher in magnetic field strength. For instance, the higher you go, the higher the radio frequency energy, and then it can lead to potential tissue heating, coil bonds, some physiological changes such as nausea and vomiting, tissue and tissue bonds, I already mentioned that, ear effects, and metallic taste. So these are some of the, it's here and there. It has advantages and disadvantages. But of course, the resolution is beautiful. It has very high signal to noise ratio as you go higher in strength. Okay, so this is a photo of what the MR machine looks like. That's the closed type, which is more, common. And these are some of the components that I already mentioned. So you have the magnet itself. Within this bore, you have the gradient coils, the RF coils, and this is the patient table, and these are the gradient tape cabinets, the radio frequency amplifiers, and then these are the This is the operator console and RF shielding around the room and also around the machine. Okay, so let's talk about the magnets. This is the biggest component of the MRI machine, and is capable of producing very powerful and stable magnetic field. Okay. It aligns, the duty of this machine is to align the protons within the patient's body, okay, for signal generation. And I already talked about the different strengths of the magnets. There are different types of magnets. You have the permanent magnet, the resistive magnet, and the superconducting magnet. Presently, the superconducting magnet is what is commonly used now. And they are made up of superconducting coils within this huge magnet as superconducting coils, okay? And they weigh about 10 tons, very heavy. These wires have no resistance as long as it's kept cool. Then we'll talk about the gradient coils. Okay, so if you look at this machine, this photo here, the gradient coils are actually within that ball. Okay, and the gradients produce, the gradient have coils within the MR scanner assembly, okay? So when this MRI machine is in the resting state, it doesn't produce any image because the magnetic field is uniform. It has a homogeneous magnetic field over the region of the patient's body. But when gradients are introduced, okay, it causes an inhomogeneity, which is needed, okay, to produce these signals. So that's the work of these gradients. These gradient designs may differ depending on the manufacturer. So the duty of the gradient is to change the magnetic field strength from one point of the patient's body to the next. And then the radio frequency coils. This is what it looks like, also in form of coils. That, you know what radio frequency waves are, the electromagnetic waves, so that means that non-ionizing, and they also sit within around the gradient coil. Radio frequency coil is responsible for transmitting and receiving imaging signals. So the duty of the radio frequency energy is to generate proton spin, to make the protons within the patient's tissues to spin, okay? The tissues absorb this radio frequency energy and then converts it to heat, and then a small amount of that energy is also emitted as signals, which is used to generate the images. There are different types of coil depending on the manufacturer. You can have the body coil, head coil, surface coil, and these can actually vary in shape and sizes. Then we'll talk about the MR coils. These are anatomically tailored depending on the part of the body that is being imaged. So if it's a knee scan you want to do, it has a knee coil, a torso area coil, spine coil, breast coil. So it depends on the anatomy or the part of the body that is being imaged, okay? They also house a set of coils and other electronics. So the duty of this MR coils is to amplify the radio frequency transmission and reception to produce optimal image quality. And the cryogenic cooling system. So MRI scanners use cooling system to cool the superconducting magnets to very low temperatures so as to maintain their superconducting state and maximize the field stability. So it uses helium, okay? And these systems regulate the temperatures to as low as minus 269 degrees centigrade. It can also generate noise. That's why when you come near an MRI machine, you hear some, background noise. Most of it comes from this cryogenic cooling system. And we'll talk about the operating console. This is where the technologists or the radiographers, configure scan protocols, monitor the scan, initiate imaging sequences, adjust settings, and troubleshoot generally. And then the power distributing unit. Okay. For you to have an MRI scan, you need constant power supply, constant and stable power delivery. It's very essential for powering the magnetic coils, the gradient amplifiers, the components. And then the gradient amplifier, this is still part of the gradient. So they induce special variations in the magnetic field and facilitate precise signal localization within the patient's body. Okay, so the duty of the amplifiers is to ensure high resolution, spatial localization of the MR signals. They also come in different geometry or configuration. Same with the RF amplifier. Then the image reconstruction computer. We have different algorithms, software, different MR software that varies in algorithms, visualization tools. It all depends on the manufacturer. This can come in different configurations. And the duty is to process raw data to generate detailed images for diagnosis. And then we talk about the other peripheral devices, such as the pump injectors, the patient monitors, input devices, contrast injectors, associated with the MR machine. And very importantly, MR safety system. So before a patient goes to do an MRI, there are certain history that needs to be taken from the patient, especially concerning metals. Are you putting on any jewelry? Are you putting any wristwatches? Do you have any implants? Okay, such as cochlear implants, cardiac pacemakers, eye implants. Have you had orthopedic implants within your bones? So these are very important. Some of them are actually MR safe now, but it's important to do this, to ask these questions, because he's entering a very high, powerful magnetic field. So this safety system includes MR compatible patient monitoring devices, interlock systems for magnet quenching, audible and visual alarms for alerting personnel to safety hazards. RF shielding. The MR system and the MR room should have shielding, okay, to prevent interference with, electronic devices, to minimize these interferences. These shielding are usually made of copper or stainless steel. But then there could be variations in the material composition. And of course, site configuration varies. So in a nutshell, with respect to the components of MR, the intricate synergy of these MR scanner components transforms the system into a remarkable diagnostic tool. So an MR machine, or MR system, needs all of this, okay, for it to function. Each of these elements plays a crucial role in capturing and processing raw data into detailed images for diagnostic interpretation. Now we move to the application in disease and diagnosis and its impact on clinical practice. The MRI machine is used to examine almost every part of the body. It is very valuable for neurological diseases of the brain and the spinal cord, and Parkinson's disease. It's also good in diagnosis of cancer, tumors, stroke, musculoskeletal imaging, and it's non-invasive. So it reduces the stress that the patient goes through and complications that may come from, invasive procedures. For instance, MRCP, magnetic resonance cholangiopancreatography, can actually do what the ERCP will do, especially if intervention is not needed. Okay, and then it can also do diagnostic arthroscopy. Then functional MR studies have improved the diagnosis of neurological disorders like Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and Parkinson's disease. In research, MRI has, formed a lot of base for research of different pathologies. Functional MRI, especially, has been used in mental health field for research in depression and schizophrenia and other mental health pathologies. Diffusion-weighted imaging, tractography has, been extensively used in traumatic brain injury. Other advantages of MRI, we already said that it's non-ionizing, so it's virtually harmless. So it's non-invasive, so there's no risk of infection. It has excellent soft tissue. It's multiplanar imaging, you can also reconstruct. It is safe in pregnancy, especially without contrast. What are some of the disadvantages of MRI? We can't talk about advantages without disadvantages. Patients with metallic metal in the body or pacemaker may not be able to get into this MRI machine, especially if they are not compatible. Patients who are claustrophobic may find it difficult to undergo MRI examination. May be difficult for overweight patients, especially the closed type of MRI. The noise from changing of the gradients can be a thing of concern, because when you get into the machine, you hear some noise as gradients are being changed. There is slight risk of developing allergic reaction to contrast agents. And the little risk of nephrogenic systemic fibrosis, okay? Then what are the constraints and barriers in MRI usage? This is especially in low to moderate income countries. Affordability. MRI is expensive. The cost of acquiring it, the installation and maintenance runs from $150,000 to $900,000 or even more, depending on the components of the machine, the magnetic field strength, depending on if it's brand new or refurbished. And then talk about the accessibility. Most times these machines are located in the urban regions, while the rural regions, I've never seen an MRI located in the rural regions or the villages. So it reduces accessibility, lack of infrastructure. You can see this machine is not a machine that you can just, it's not like ultrasound machine. So it has a lot of components. So we need proper infrastructure for you to set up an MRI system. Lack of investment plans and prioritization, which is mostly what we suffer in low-income countries. For instance, in Nigeria, where the money is there, but lack of prioritization and investment plans is a very big problem in places like in African region generally. Lack of continuous power supply is another big issue. Epileptic power supply, an MRI system needs constant and continuous power supply. Lack of specialists and trained personnel. You need an MR physicist, technologist, the radiologist that will interpret the images, and these are still very few in Africa. and other low and moderate income countries. Stringent criteria for radiation protection. So MRI, for you to set up an MRI system, you need approval from IAEA, International Basic Safety Standards. Make sure that you have, comply to the basic safety standards. So what's the way forward? You need to increase access to and utilization of MRI services because it's essential in improving healthcare access and quality of healthcare in Africa. So who are involved? Our government is involved. So we need to advocate, we need to talk to the government, tell them the importance of this, and also the public, general public, private sectors, NGOs, international organizations, and well-meaning individuals in the country. It is very imperative to deploy resources for acquiring this machine, for the installation, and for the maintenance of MRI machine. Professor Wele already talked about the need, okay, because we need a professionally qualified crew to run an MRI system. The radiologists, the radiographers, medical physicists should receive continuous training. Improve access via health insurance or subsidy, because for a patient to have an MRI scan is quite expensive. In Nigeria now, it's about from 85,000 naira and upwards. And the minimum wage in Nigeria as of today is 30,000 naira. So it's a very expensive examination. Okay, that brings us to the end of this, and I'm now going to play a video, a simplified video to show the physics of MRI.
Brief overview of magnetic resonance and a basic MRI spin echo sequence. Let's talk about protons. We have protons in the fat, muscle, and sugars within our body, and of course, within water. Remember that a significant portion of our bodies consists of water, and that a hydrogen atom is just a proton, one positron and one electron, with a positive and a negative pole. Because of this, each of these protons is capable of acting like a bar magnet. Usually, the orientation of these protons is random, but they can be influenced by an external magnetic field. At the most basic level, an MRI scanner is a giant magnet and generates its own magnetic field, which we can call B0. When protons are placed within this magnetic field, they'll line up parallel or anti-parallel to the primary magnetic field, with a small majority aligning with the direction of the primary magnetic field, just going with the flow. This generates what is referred to as the magnetic field produced by the MRI scanner. The protons in your body are also spinning along their axes like little tops or globes. This is called precession or nuclear spin. The speed or frequency of this axial spin depends on the strength of the applied magnetic field and can be expressed by the Larmor equation. Simply put, this equation states that the precession frequency of a particle is equal to the strength of the magnetic field applied and the gyromagnetic ratio, which is a constant that is unique to each specific nucleus or element. With the protons aligned with the main magnetic field, we can influence them using externally applied radio frequency or RF pulses. When this happens, the protons are knocked down into an alternate plane and also precess together in phase. The angle depends on the strength and duration of the RF pulse. Knocking the protons down into another plane is a change in their longitudinal magnetization. Normally, the majority of protons are going with the flow and following the direction of the external magnetic field. But with a little extra energy, which we can call excitation, protons have the ability to go against the current and instead orient themselves in the opposite direction against that of the magnetic field. This is called anti-parallel. That's not all that happens. With some energy applied in the form of the RF pulse, the protons will also precess together in phase. We can think of this brief synchronization as the transverse magnetization of the protons. To recap, we've put some energy into the system and temporarily convinced each of these protons to sit down and get it together. This doesn't last long, much as if you were knocked off of your feet or if I yelled at my wild little children as they ran haphazardly around their playroom. Recovery is imminent. They'll behave for a short time, but they'll soon return my energy back to me as the baseline state of disorder is restored. Much like my children, the protons will recover or return to their original state of orientation with the magnetic field and asynchronous precession. Now that we've gone over what can happen when we administer an RF pulse, let's talk specifically about what happens during a typical spin echo sequence. Remember, the flip angle induced by an RF pulse depends on the strength and duration of the pulse. The thing being flipped is the net magnetization vector. At the beginning of a standard spin echo sequence, we apply a 90-degree pulse. This means that after the RF pulse has been applied, the net magnetization vector is perpendicular to its original orientation. This orientation is achieved by eliminating longitudinal magnetization and generating a transverse magnetization vector by synchronizing proton precession. During recovery, longitudinal magnetization increases and transverse magnetization decreases. The protons dephase. This looks like a spiraling of the net magnetic vector along the z-axis. This spiraling of the net magnetization vector induces an electrical signal by a process called free induction decay, which is really just a throwback to the high school physics principle of inducing a current by rotating a magnetic field. Search the depths of your mind for the right-hand rule. A few additional terms to note. The recovery of the longitudinal magnetization of a proton occurs exponentially. The point at which 63% of the longitudinal magnetization has been recovered is called the T1 time. The time at which 63% of the transverse magnetization has been lost is called the T2 time. The T1 and T2 time is unique to each tissue type imaged. Think about a class of children running a foot race. Each will recover to their baseline heart rate at a slightly different time, depending on their physical fitness. We can take advantage of these unique tissue properties and alter the MRI sequences to highlight them. This is called weighting, and discussion of this is for another time. That wasn't so bad, was it? Seemed too good to be true? In a way, it is. There are a few caveats and drawbacks to the concept of free induction decay. Number 1, it only applies to 90-degree pulses. Number 2, the signal decays very rapidly and requires a very fast scanner to detect. Number 3, the dephasing of protons occurs at a speed known as the T2 star constant. This exponential decay in the synchronization of proton spins is due to the fact that each proton experiences the magnetic field at a slightly different strength, meaning there is never true uniformity in precession. These differences in precession end up compiling, leading to increasingly asynchronous spins. Because each proton already experiences the magnetic field differently than its neighbors, any inhomogeneity in the magnetic field makes dephasing, and thus signal dropout, even worse. These are called T2 star effects. On MR imaging, these T2 star effects can appear as diffuse loss of signal, or black holes, in areas where the magnetic field is particularly distorted. Because these effects are due to an inhomogeneous magnetic field, we can liken them to distractions in a child's environment. T2 star effects seem terrible. Isn't there any way to fight them? Fret not. The answer is yes. The good news is that we can combat T2 star effects and their resulting signal decay with the addition of another RF pulse. To understand this, we must remember that although magnetic field inhomogeneity is inconvenient, it is manageable in the sense that the differences in precession speed that they cause are fixed and predictable. As some protons lag behind their faster counterparts, we can apply a 180-degree refocusing RF pulse that instructs all of the protons to turn around and process in the opposite direction. Much like the classic tale of the tortoise and the hare, though the tortoise is far behind the rabbit, if we ask both to turn around and head back to the starting line of the race, they'll catch up to each other and arrive at the same time due to the differences in their speeds. The crowd goes wild. It's a tie! When the proton procession syncs up following the 180-degree pulse, more energy is released back into the system. This is called an echo, and it is the information collected by the MR scanner, which will eventually generate a medical image. We can liken the 180-degree refocusing pulse and the synchronous procession it creates to an elementary school class photo shoot. The teacher may need to raise her voice in order to get the class to focus its attention on the photographer and achieve a yearbook-worthy shot, the echo. We can apply additional 180-degree pulses to achieve multiple echoes, photo after photo after photo, to continue decreasing the T2 star effects. Eventually, however, the students have nothing left to give. Less and less energy is yielded back with each echo. Eventually, dephasing occurs completely and the echo dies out. Once that happens, the sequence must be restarted again with another 90-degree pulse. Imaging in this manner is called spin echo or fast spin echo imaging. We can use universal diagrams to depict what happens with specific MR sequences. Let's use one to recap the basic fast spin echo sequence that we've just discussed. Protons are aligned with the main magnetic field, B0, and are processing randomly. A 90-degree RF pulse is applied, eliminating longitudinal magnetization and producing a transverse magnetization vector as protons process in phase. Longitudinal recovery and transverse decay occur, producing a signal by a free induction decay, which is susceptible to T2 star effects. A 180-degree refocusing pulse temporarily rephases proton procession, producing an echo which can be read out by the MR scanner. The moment that the echo is produced is called the TE, or time to echo. We can apply multiple refocusing pulses in an attempt to capture as many echoes as possible. The echoes become successively weaker until the signal dies out completely and the sequence must be restarted. The time between repetition of sequences is called the TR, or time to repetition. That's all for now. This concludes our overview of magnetic resonance and the basic MRI spin echo sequence.